Hey guys, welcome back to Chess Bootcamp. So what I tend to do for most of my videos is to take you through games where I'm competing against a player sometimes rated below 1000, sometimes rated above 1000. In this example, my opponent is rated just over 1200. So what I'm going to try and show you is some of the basic principles and, more importantly, the thought processes and the mental state that you want to get into in order to beat players up to 1000 and then beyond. So let's dive into this game. So my opponent's playing white, I'm playing black, and he opens with d4. I have been playing the Dutch quite a lot recently with f5, but I decided to resurrect an old favourite, which is the black lion. Quite an unusual opening system. So I reply with d6, e4 is played, knight to f6, knight to c3, and then I bring out my other knight to d7. Very familiar position. The other knight comes out to f3, and I play e5. So far, so normal. One of the continuations here is if white captures on e5, but my opponent thought for a little while and decided to advance the pawn, which is good for me. I'm happy with that. I then bring my bishop out to e7, and he brings his knight out to h4, which is odd. So this is one of those moves that you kind of wait for in an opening, which constitutes a little flag waving, because he's moved one of his developed pieces a second time, and you have to ask, why has he done that? So I'm guessing that his intention is to get the knight in here to f5, which is understandable and reasonable. But what I realise now is that there's a tactic that allows me to win material. So I stop here, I wait for 30 seconds, I think for 30 seconds, just make doubly sure. So my idea is that if this knight wasn't there, I would have two pieces lined up against his knight there on h4. And what that means, and there's no defender actually at all, so I would only need one piece. So what that means is that if I move this knight, I am going to get a free piece. Therefore, I can go ahead and take that pawn, which is what I do in the game. White recaptures, and then I grab a knight, and I'm a pawn up. So it's not massive, it's not hugely significant, but it's an advantage. It also means I've got two pawns with some central control here in the middle of the board now. White's only got this one pawn out in the board, and we've both got one piece developed. So White has now lost the initiative that he started with. And you need to think in terms of those moves that he's spent. Okay, so we're on move, this is move 8 now. This pawn pushes move 8, so we've had 7 moves, right? He's used 2 of those moves invested 2 of those moves in his knight from the G file, from G, which has gone 1, then 2, and then it's disappeared. So those moves have evaporated, those moves have gone. There is no advantage to him having played those moves on the board. The only thing that's happened is he's brought out my bishop. Okay, so I'm now almost like the white player. I have the initiative in this game. This is also another very weak move. I think this is a mistake. If you think about it, okay, so yes, there is a bishop on h4. And yes, this bishop is looking at white's king. But is it an imminent threat? Is this something that white has to respond to? And I would argue no. Because if that bishop were to take that pawn, white can recapture with a knight or with a king. Okay? And this move, as we will see, is very weakening. It wouldn't be so bad if he maybe fianchettoed his bishop behind it and then castled. That would be maybe okay. Of course, he's missing his knight that would naturally be on f3. A better move than g3 might be, for example, bishop to e3. That's adding a third defender to the pawn, and it's developing a piece. And then if his queen comes out, he might think about castling queenside. So this is a move that does more than one thing, right? This is a move that really achieves very little. Yes, it kicks my bishop, right? And my bishop has to retreat. But does it leave white with a better position on the board than he had before? I would argue that it probably doesn't, and you can see that this one move actually comes back to bite white and cause him some problems. He now brings his bishop out to pin my knight, and I kick the bishop with a6. He decides to exchange, so he takes my knight. I'm quite happy about that. We've got a nice open board, even though there's still quite a few pawns left on there. The pawns aren't very advanced, they're not locked in the middle of the board. There's lots of scope for bishops to run around and cause mischief. So I recapture with my light squared bishop, which has the advantage of freeing up now my light squared bishop on 2 diagonals, whereas previously it was absolutely landlocked in there on c8. Okay, so if you think about it, white has played one move to develop his bishop. I kick the bishop and he gives it away. All right, so that's 2 moves. Again, he's spent 2 moves and his bishop's gone. It's off the board. So those moves have gone with it. There's no benefit to those moves. Again, all that he has done is liberated my bishop. So white is now solidly on the back foot in this game and playing catch-up. He now castles kingside, which I think is an error. And the main reason is there's this very, very weak g2 square. These 2 squares are also weak. They are not controlled by pawns. And if you look at it, black still has a light squared bishop on the board. So this bishop could cause trouble in this area, as we will see. So I castle in a much stronger position. Rook to e1 is played, and now bishop to h3. And this is a threat. Okay, this bishop can now sit there, lurk there in the corner. It's guarding these 2 squares. So the white king out of the 3 adjacent squares, it only has 1 that it can actually move to legally. Okay, and there's clearly the threat of potentially, if my queen can ever get onto this long diagonal, then my queen could dive in to g2 with a stunning checkmate. So, and I'm quite happy to leave my bishop there. One of the things that I'm learning as I improve in chess is to layer up the threats, to layer up the dangers and the weaknesses against my opponent. So I'm quite happy with my bishop there. I know that the knight can't attack it, because if the knight goes there, I've got bishop and queen, and it's defended only by bishop. So if the knight moved there, it would basically be lost. And it can't go to this square, which is the other square that it might go to try and kick my bishop away. And there's no pawn, remember this is an outpost, there is no pawn that can push this bishop off that square. Okay, the only way that my opponent could possibly kick that bishop away would be with using his pieces. So I now drop my dark squared bishop back to e7, out of the way of the knight, and white pushes a5. Okay, right. The other thing that this allows me to do is to push f5 and kick the knight away. The knight actually only has 2 squares to go to. All the others are covered by pawns and such. So back the knight goes to a much safer place for me. There are really no threats for me right now. All of black's pieces, if you notice, are over here, and my king is on the other side of the board. I've got a piece deeply embedded. I've got this spy in black's camp, in white's camp, sorry. So now I decide to activate my queen. So the idea is queen to d7, then push c6, and if captures, queen captures, and I've suddenly got this lovely open long diagonal on the light squares that I could potentially checkmate. So that's a plan. Good to have a plan. b4 is played. For some reason, I push c6. White doesn't fall for the trap, which is good, and instead develops his bishop to b2. And I decide to push with my f-pawn. I want to bust open white's position. His pieces are in the wrong place. They're badly positioned. They are not defending his king. All that's defending his king are 3 measly pawns. So for me, as for Freddy the f-pawn, for me, can sacrifice himself to bust open white's position. That doesn't do me any harm because my rook's still on the f-file. let's go for it. White now throws his queen into the mix in defense, but this is not a particularly strong move because I have f takes g3, which comes with a discovered attack on the queen, and the pawn is also attacking these. So really there's only one move, which is that white has to capture the pawn. The bishop's okay, the bishop's still defended by my queen. So I now lift my rook, f8 to f6. Obviously the plan is, when you see your opponent's highest value pieces on the same file, you want to get a rook onto there if you can. So f6, the idea is rook to g6, winning the queen. So the king ducks out of the way, and I play g6 anyway. Why? One thing is that it gives me more control, so instead of looking up at this f file, I'm now looking at the g file. I've got now two pieces looking at g2, and it also is a body blow to my opponent. My opponent now has to react. It's a forcing move. He's got to do something with his queen, and there's not that many squares that he can actually go to. So he can't stay on the g file at all. He can't capture the bishop, can't go there. So there's actually only 3 squares that queen can go to, by the look of it. So the queen goes across to d3, and now I decide to capture the pawn. Now this is a trap. Can you see the trap? Okay, I'll give you a minute. Pause the video if you need to. Okay, so I thought this through. Okay, I am taking a pawn, which could help open up this, not that diagonal, this diagonal. But this is actually a trap. I'm laying a trap for white's queen. Now I could have thrown in a check or whatever earlier on, potentially. There's also another very, very good move that I could have done here. I notice now. So what is the trap? The trap is if the queen captures there. Now obviously the queen's taken with check, so the first thing that I have to do is get out of check. And the way that I do that is that I choose to block with the queen. I could have also moved my king to maybe h8. But I see that here I can tempt white once more. Because if I move my queen there, oh no, I've blundered another pawn. There's a pawn on b7 that's undefended. And what's more, if the queen takes that pawn on the next move, she could take my a8 rook and have a winning position. But again, it's the same trap. Okay, queen captures there. So now temporarily material is equal. But now bishop to g2 is a lovely bishop fork. Not the most common type of fork that you get, but it's attacking both the king and the queen. Now what I realise now is that there was another tactic that I could have maybe used instead of this one, which was this. I could have played, in fact this is much more convincing, bishop to g2 first, and then that would force king to g1. And then I could have played the bishop back to e4, so the bishop attacks the queen, but the king there would be in check. Having said that, then queen could have moved across to g3, blocking the check, would have still fallen to the rook. Okay, so that's not what happened in the game. I did the fork, but I think this is actually slightly inferior alternative. I think what I've just proposed would have been better because I would have only lost a rook. Here, queen takes bishop, rook takes, king takes. So I've exchanged a rook and a bishop, nominal value 8 points, for a queen, nominal value 9 points. So I'm slightly ahead points-wise in material. However, you have to notice that white has 4 pieces on the board, and I have 3 pieces on the board, right? So, in terms of point scoring, I'm maybe 1 point in front nominally, but so what I need to do now is I need to take advantage of my strengths, and my strengths are I have a queen. Another one is that my king is relatively safe, it's got 2 pawns in front of it. And also, thinking of my opponent's weaknesses, his pawns are broken up and offer little protection for this king that's out in the open. So, how do we capitalize? How do we strike fast, strike hard first of all throw in a check. King retreats to f1, and now I add another threat. Okay, always threats, threats, threats. Rook to f8, so I'm threatening now to capture on there in a couple of moves. So white now plays his other rook across to d1. What this does is it also inhibits this rook to some degree from moving, and there is a little bit of danger of trapping the king now in this corner here. So I come in with two threats really. The immediate one is queen takes f2 checkmate, all right? But there's another which is maybe queen to h1. With these squares unavailable, the king would be forced out into the open again. So white now plays a move which is one option, but I don't think it was the best option in this case. So white has played knight to e4, where it seems to defend the pawn on f2. However, this actually leaves white open to another tactic, which is down to forcing moves. Okay, so right now this rook is defending the knight, and that seems fair enough. However, if I now play queen to h1, as we've seen, there's only one square that the king can move to, which is e2, right? And now the queen can take the knight because the king has moved in the way of the rook that was defending the knight. So you've got to be careful. I think that defending that pawn with a rook would probably have been a better idea. So now there's a significant difference in material. King moves across. I develop my bishop with check. I don't want my bishop to be staring at this pawn here. So it comes in with check. King moves across. Rook comes in with check. And now if you think, these are all the squares that are unavailable. In fact, the king actually has no squares it can move to legally. So it's almost checkmate. White is forced to block with a rook. This was the best choice. I capture, blocks with another rook. I capture, and now pawn takes. And now we'll just see the finish. So queen comes down to c6 with another check. And now I'm trying to force the exchange of bishops. Clearly that's not in white's favour, so he moves out the way. And I decide to try and clear away some of these pawns, see if I can force them to swap off. And now I bring my queen here. I'm trying to remember the reason for that move. I mean, there's no obvious checks. So yeah, my queen's just basically manoeuvring around to d3 there. And here again, I mean, white's in a terrible position, a lost position. I mean, clearly the king can't move to there because he's going to face checkmate. Can't go to there, same reason. So it's really out of options. Has to block with the bishop. But now when I move my bishop, I've got two attackers against the pinned piece. The pinned piece cannot move. And if and when I capture, the king can't recapture. So I have to check, obviously, that this isn't stalemate because the pawn is guarding that square. So the king currently cannot move, but white has three more pawns on the board that can move, so I'm quite happy about that. And then queen takes b4 is a nice, neat checkmate. So a few important tactics in there that we can learn from. And also, I think some of the key moments in the game, some of the key errors that white has made, I think provide some good instruction there as well. I think particularly that moving pieces in the opening more than once and then swapping them off is a great way to lose your advantage as white. So that's one thing to take away. Try not to do that. Okay. Hope this has been useful for you, and I'll see you next time.